Sold like cattle, she clung to her baby sister, hoping someone might see her as more than a debt to be paid. Born on the hard red dirt of Dustwater, Maggie Ray was sold off like livestock, clutching her newborn sister with nothing left but hope that someone might see her as more than a debt to be paid. Days blurred with labor and shame, hunger digging deeper than any wound, but Maggie wouldn't break. Sometimes freedom starts with nothing but a kind glance, a warm cornbread in a cold hand, and a promise whispered, "I ain't leaving you behind." Red dirt clung to Maggie Ray's bare ankles as she stumbled from the wagon, arms aching around the swaddled shape of Ellie Mae. The baby's cry cut sharp through the searing noon, fighting with the men's laughter, gravelly, careless, the way folks laugh when they know the world belongs to them and not to you. Maggie's hair, matted with sweat, stuck to her face. Her eyes burned, but not from the sun alone. She'd stopped crying for herself 3 days ago, the moment that distant cousin pressed a slip of paper into her palm and said, "Your lucky cane'll take you, girl. You're debt, but at least you'll eat." The wagon driver spat and drove her east, farther than any map her father once drew. Now, on the edge of Dustwater, nothing but blistered sky and wind-beaten boardwalks, she stood small beside the towering frame of Virgil Kane. He didn't bother with her name, never looked at her full in the face, just ran a thick finger down a crumpled ledger, lips moving. 3 months' labor for the girl, he announced. 2 for the brat. Someone behind him, maybe the foreman or just another body, whistled low. "That baby even hers?" Maggie said nothing, only drew Ellie Mae closer, so the heat from her own chest might steady the tiny, uneven breaths. A calloused hand shoved her forward. The men circled, boots kicking up old dust, eyes sliding over her as if she were some mule to be traded, or less. Virgil Kane smirked, tobacco wedged in the crack of his teeth. "That's your bunk." He jerked his chin toward a shack near the red bluff. "You work till I say you're done. That baby cries, you hush her outside. No use for soft hearts here." The men laughed again. Maggie stared at her toes, trying to remember the sound of grass, or her mama's hands, or the tune her father used to hum as dusk fell over their lost valley. The shack, no more than 6 warped planks, a tin roof patched with rope and rust, smelled of old sweat, wet wood, and the memory of every girl who'd slept there before her. Inside, it was dim and cramped. Bunks stacked and splintered, air thick with the sour ache of labor. Ellie Mae, skin flushed, whimpered against Maggie's chest. Maggie laid her gently on a ragged quilt, the same one she'd wrapped around her on the road, the same one her mother pieced together from old feed sacks and Sunday shirts. She bent to kiss the baby's downy head and whispered, "Shh, little one, you got me, I got you. That's all for now." Evening slid in heavy and mean, dragging long shadows across the camp. The clang of a dinner bell cut the hush, and Maggie joined the silent line. Girls older, girls younger, all with the same hollow look, shoulders rounded from bending too long. Kane's wife, a hard-boned woman with eyes like a hawk, slapped ladlefuls of watery beans into tin bowls. "Don't linger, don't beg, take what you get." The food tasted of smoke and salt and the dread of tomorrow. Ellie Mae cried in the night, her tiny hands grasping at nothing. A fist hammered the wall. "Quiet that thing," someone hissed. Maggie slipped outside, pressing her back to the cool planks, rocking the baby under a sliver of moon, letting her own tears drop silent into the dirt. By dawn, the work began. She scrubbed laundry in cold, iron-rich water, her knuckles raw and red, while Ellie Mae dozed in a fruit crate lined with Maggie's only dress. She carried pails, fetched wood, swept out the bunkhouse. Her feet cracked open, her arms trembled, but every time she thought she'd fall, she looked at Ellie Mae and somehow kept moving. The older girls gave her sideways glances, never smiles. Trust was in short supply. A few times Maggie caught one of them, Sarah maybe, or Lila, turn away when Kane's voice grew rough, but nobody reached out. That's how things were in Dustwater. Everyone kept to their own patch of shadow, praying not to be noticed. On the third evening, after the sun had baked the fields down to dust and the air stank of old horses, Maggie sat by the door, Ellie Mae asleep on her chest, listening to the coyotes far off in the gullies. She almost believed she was invisible, folded so small the world might pass her by, but she could not make herself forget the words Kane spat that afternoon. "You're nothing, Ray, just a debt I bought. You mess up, I'll send you and that brat back in a box." The shame settled deep in her ribs. A stone she could not move. Her mind replayed the journey that led her here, the fever that took her father, her mother's cough, the way neighbors turned their backs, the cousin's blunt hand on her shoulder, the last glimpse of home through a curtain of dust. The weeks ahead stretched out like a road she couldn't see the end of. Still, Maggie held tight to Ellie Mae. Her world narrowed to the heat of that tiny body, the fragile rise and fall of each breath. If she let herself hope, it was a dangerous thing. Hope got girls hurt in Dustwater, but in the deepest part of her, Maggie Ray promised herself, "I'll keep her safe no matter what it takes, even if it costs every piece of me." The days bled together in a slow, choking heat, sun battering the roof of the shack until Maggie Ray thought her bones might turn to dust. Each morning she rose before first light, brushing Ellie Mae's wisps of hair from the baby's sticky brow, whispering, "Just a little more, Ellie. Hold on." No one spoke to her as she crossed the dirt yard, only the thud of buckets, the low cough of tired girls, the distant bray of a mule straining against its harness. Virgil Kane's world ran on sweat and silence. He patrolled the trampled patch of ground between the cabins and the laundry shed, boots grinding grit into the boards. The labor was endless, hauling wash to the creek, scrubbing out stains, hanging shirts that weren't hers on sagging lines. She never got close to the others. Evenings the girls huddled together on bunks, whispering about the outside, but Maggie only curled herself around Ellie Mae, keeping her close, hiding her from the drafts that sliced through every crooked gap in the walls. Sometimes when the baby slept, Maggie let herself stare at the moonlight slanting through broken boards and wondered if her mama's soul ever found its way out of this place. The inside of the shack was a kingdom of hardship. The girls' hands, all nicked and red, moved with the weary rhythm of those who've been working for a lifetime, not for weeks or months. The bunks groaned under their shifting weight. Some girls snored with exhaustion, some cried soft into their pillows, thinking no one heard. Ellie Mae's cradle was a rag-tied box near Maggie's feet, her tiny form always curled tight, face pinched, lips rooting for milk Maggie's body could barely make. Once Kane's wife glanced down, lip curling. "Ought to give her up, girl. She'll only slow you down." Maggie said nothing. She remembered too well the night the baby came. Her mama's breath rattling, the storm's roar, the loneliness of dawn. The work got heavier as summer crept on. Maggie's arms ached from drawing water, wrists raw from wringing out towels for Kane's family, back burning from bending over the big iron wash tub. When she paused, just for a second, Jed Kramer, Kane's right hand, always lurking, always watching, would appear in the doorway, his shadow swallowing the light. "Move it, Ray. Lazy gets you nothing here." His voice snapped like a whip. Sometimes he grabbed her arm too hard, left bruises the color of storm clouds. She learned to move quick, keep her eyes down, never answer back. Nights were the worst. The air inside the shack grew thick, rank with sweat and mildew. The older girls coughed, shifting on their bunks. Maggie wrapped Ellie Mae in the last clean scrap of cloth, holding her close, listening to her breath. Hunger gnawed at them both, an old ache Maggie had learned to ignore. She broke bread into tiny pieces for the baby, dipped her fingers in well water to soothe parched lips. There were no soft words, no lullabies, only the hush of the wind slipping under the door, the crackle of something crawling across the dirt floor, and her whispered promise. "Tomorrow will be better, Ellie. I'll find a way." In the dark, Maggie remembered how different life had once been. She saw her father's hands lifting her to a sunlit saddle, her mother's laughter at the stove, the wild freedom of running through tall grass, bare feet skipping over cool earth. It all seemed to belong to someone else now, a girl she could barely recall. One evening when the day had been longer than most and the creek had run low and muddy, Maggie stumbled into the cabin, nearly dragging her legs. Ellie Mae whimpered in her sling. The room was empty but for a thin, gray-haired woman sitting on the edge of a bunk, mending a sleeve. "You got kin somewhere?" the woman asked without looking up. Maggie shook her head. "Not anymore." The woman nodded, as if that explained everything. "Name's Annie Lou. You keep your head down, do your work, and don't cross Kane. You'll last." Maggie tried to thank her, but her voice came out cracked, and Annie Lou only shook her head again, threading her needle. "Ain't no room for gratitude in this place, child. Save it for the ones who deserve it." That night, as wind battered the walls and the wood creaked with old sorrow, Maggie pressed Ellie Mae to her chest, feeling the child's warmth like the last ember of a dying fire. She couldn't see a way out, not yet, but she held on to the little body, counted every breath, every heartbeat, and promised again, "I'll keep you safe." She tried to believe it, but hope was a small, slippery thing in dust water, easy to lose and hard to find again. Maggie woke before dawn, her back damp from the hard bunk, and her heart pounding at some distant noise, a coyote's howl, or just the wind hustling tumbleweed down the empty main road. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake Ellie Mae, who, by some small mercy, had finally fallen into a deep sleep, lips open, hands fisted in the frayed edge of the blanket. Maggie lay there a while, eyes open to the black, listening for the footsteps of trouble. The world outside was all gray shadow and the taste of dust. She didn't dare to dream, not anymore, but that morning as she stepped out to the yard with her arms aching and her hair tangled with straw, she saw something that didn't fit the ordinary misery of Dustwater. A man on horseback had come in from the edge of the settlement, alone, tall in the saddle, hat slung low, but his face was clean-shaven and his jacket was patched but neat. He wasn't one of Kane's men, and he didn't bother with their hard laughter or empty threats. He rode straight through the gate, dust trailing behind his horse like the tail of a comet, and the yard fell quiet for the first time since Maggie could remember. Maggie kept her head down. She had learned that trick from Annie Lou. You stay small, you stay invisible. She watched from the corner of her eye as the stranger dismounted. His spurs barely jingled as his boots hit the ground. He moved like he'd spent his whole life in the saddle. No need for show. He was older, maybe as old as her daddy had been before fever took him, and the streaks of gray at his temples gave him a sort of gravity, like a stone set in a riverbed. His hands were broad and scarred. He carried his own saddle across one shoulder as he walked toward the pen. The other girls slowed their work to gawk, but nobody dared speak. Kane appeared from the barn, slick hair and heavy steps, smiling that thin snake's grin. "Mornin', mister? Lookin' to buy?" The stranger's gaze flicked up, cold as a winter creek. "Looking at your stock. Heard you got a few Morgans for sale." His voice was steady, unhurried, and it made Kane's smile falter just a bit. "Best horses in the county, that's what I say." Kane turned, signaling to Jed, who yanked Maggie's arm and shoved her toward the well. "Quit staring, Ray. Ain't your business." She bit her tongue, scooped up a bucket, and went to draw water, careful not to slosh any onto her dress. But she couldn't help it. She looked back. The stranger was examining the horses, running a hand along their flanks, checking hooves, not rushed by Kane's impatient chatter. For a heartbeat, Maggie forgot her shame, forgot the ache in her chest, and just watched him. He paused, noticing her by the well, and for the briefest moment their eyes met, gray flecked with tired blue, a glance that said more than words. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked at the bundle in her arms. Ellie Mae, still asleep, little lips trembling as she dreamed. That look stilled Maggie's heart. There was something in his eyes, a sadness maybe, or just a memory of better times. For a split second, she felt seen, not as a burden or a pawn, but as a girl with a story. She turned away, cheeks burning, angry at herself for hoping. Kane's men laughed from the porch, spitting tobacco and making bets on how long the stranger would stay before riding on. The morning crawled. Maggie hauled water, wrung out sheets, tried not to let her mind wander. By noon the stranger had picked his horse, paid in coin that clinked bright and honest against Kane's palm. Maggie thought that would be the end of it, just another man passing through, one more face to forget. But as he mounted up, he paused, looking back toward the yard, toward her. She couldn't say why, but the sight of him leaving made something in her chest twist, as if she'd lost something she never had. That night, with Ellie Mae swaddled and the sky turning bruised and purple above the camp, Maggie lay awake, replaying that quiet look. She tried to believe it was nothing, a trick of her lonely mind. Yet beneath the weight of another day, a strange, fragile warmth held on, burning steady as a lantern in the dark. She didn't know his name, but the memory of his gaze kept her from giving up, at least for one more night. Virgil Kane never needed a reason to be cruel, but some days he found excuses all the same. The sun rose mean and sharp, the kind of heat that made the boards of the bunkhouse swell and crack. Maggie moved slow that morning, her muscles sore, her spirit sore in places nobody could see. Ellie Mae whimpered softly, feverish and restless, her tiny mouth rooting for milk that Maggie's tired body struggled to give. Jed Kramer was already lurking by the cookshed, boots up on a barrel, chewing at a splinter of wood. He watched Maggie with the dull, hungry eyes of a dog left too long on a chain. "You're late, Ray," he barked, tossing the splinter at her feet. "Kane says you miss one more chore and he'll feed that brat to the pigs." Maggie stiffened, clutching Ellie Mae closer. "She's sick. She needs—" Jed cut her off with a shove, hard enough to send her stumbling into the mud. "She needs to keep quiet, and so do you. Water, now." Maggie blinked away tears, swallowed the lump in her throat, and went. Her knees were scraped raw from a dozen days like this. The other girls kept their distance, eyes lowered, each one clinging to her own patch of misery. No one here was foolish enough to share their pain out loud. If you did, the men only pressed harder. Inside the main house, Kane stomped from room to room, yelling about chores undone, windows left streaked with dust. Maggie mopped, scrubbed, hauled wood, all with Ellie Mae swaddled tight and heavy against her chest. When the baby's cough turned wet and wheezing, Maggie begged for a scrap of clean cloth or a minute's rest. Kane laughed in her face. If she can't keep up, that's her problem. Floor needs washing, potatoes need peeling. Move. His voice carried through the thin walls, echoing off the bare floorboards. There was never a kind word, not even from the older women. Just silence, the scrape of boots, the dull rhythm of survival. Jed took any chance to make things worse. He yanked Maggie's hair when she worked too slow, called her names that made her cheeks burn, grinned when Ellie Mae cried. Sometimes he waited until the others were watching before twisting her arm behind her back, just to remind everyone who had power here. By late afternoon, Maggie's hands were trembling so badly she nearly dropped a pan of water. Kane caught her eye and smirked. "Look at you, Ray, not worth half what I paid. Girl can't work, girl don't eat." You want that? She bit her tongue, shook her head. Didn't think so. Back to it. He spat at her feet and stomped off, leaving a trail of mud across the kitchen planks. The only thing that kept Maggie upright was Ellie Mae's fevered breath against her skin, a reminder that giving up meant more than just pain for herself. She clung to the baby, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll make it out," she told her sister when no one could hear. "I don't know how yet, but I swear." But every promise felt small inside those four rotten walls. Every hope was drowned out by Jed's shouts, Kane's boots, the ache of work that never seemed to end. The wind outside rattled the door, and for a moment Maggie let herself imagine it was someone coming for her. Anyone kind. Anyone who'd look at her and see more than another mouth to feed, another body to bruise. Night fell hard and sudden. The camp quieted save for the coughs and murmurs of the other girls and the occasional snore from Kane's men. Maggie curled up on her thin mattress, Ellie Mae pressed to her chest, her own tears silent and hot. She let herself remember that gray-haired cowboy for a breath, a man whose eyes had seen her, if only for a second. She tried to keep that memory burning. She would need it for whatever came next. Rain had a way of making everything sharper out in Dustwater. Smells of sweat and old hay, the sour tang of wood smoke, the ache in Maggie's bones. That night, the storm rolled over the flats without warning. Lightning crawled across the sky in blue veins, thunder shaking the bunks loose from the earth. The canvas roof above her leaked steady as a ticking clock. Maggie curled herself around Ellie Mae, shielding the baby with her body and the one thin coat she owned. The baby's fever burned through the worst of it, cheeks blotched red, tiny hands clinging to Maggie's dress like a plea. She hummed the song her mama used to sing, quiet enough not to draw Kane's wrath. Every verse was a memory, her mother's voice, the creak of the porch swing, hands gentle on her hair. Now those hands were gone and the world had teeth. The wind rattled the walls, and for a moment Maggie let herself whisper, "We'll get out. I swear it." The promise caught in her throat. Nobody heard it but Ellie Mae and the night. Out near the corrals, Cole Bennett stood under the eave, hat low against the rain, cigarette ember, a lone red star in the dark. He watched the yard in silence, saw Maggie huddle by the flicker of lamp through broken glass, saw Jed making his rounds with a lantern and a scowl, saw the way Kane's shadow stretched long across the mud. Cole didn't say a word. He just listened to the storm, listened to the low sobs that drifted from the bunkhouse when the thunder faded. Sometime before dawn, Ellie Mae's breathing grew thin and fast. Maggie pressed her close, rocked her gently, fear closing in around her like the cold. "Don't go," she whispered. "Don't you leave me, too." When the baby finally slept, Maggie watched the rain drip from the rafters and told herself, tomorrow. Tomorrow she'd try again, beg for medicine, steal what she had to, barter her last strength if it meant one more day for her sister. Just before the sun rose, the storm let up. The air smelled of wet earth and loss. Maggie lay awake, eyes open in the gray light, one arm curled protectively over Ellie Mae. She was more tired than she'd ever been, but somewhere deep inside, the ember of her promise glowed, faint but alive. Far off, Cole mounted his horse. He glanced back at the camp one last time, jaw set hard. He'd heard enough to know there were things in Dustwater that ought to be washed clean. He didn't believe in fairy tales, but he believed in doing right where right was needed. He rode out slow, his silhouette swallowed by the dawn, carrying with him the silent echo of a promise made in the dark. In the bunkhouse, Maggie pressed her lips to Ellie Mae's warm forehead, whispering the vow again. "We'll make it, little one. I swear it on every drop of rain." And though no one else in Dustwater heard her, the wind seemed to carry her words. Out beyond the fences, out to where hope could take root in the red dirt. The sun had a different look after a night of storms, burning white through the muddy haze, steam rising off the clay like ghosts. By noon, the camp buzzed with repair and hunger. Maggie's hands were raw from scrubbing clothes, shoulders aching from hauling water up the hill. Ellie Mae slept fitfully in the shade of a broken fence post, her breath whistling but steady, a damp rag pressed to her forehead. Maggie was rinsing a bucket at the well when Cole Bennett rode up again, leading 2 steers and a weary mule. He said nothing at first, only nodded at Kane, then spoke soft to the stable boy about prices. Kane, always keen for money, strutted over to inspect the cattle, spitting tobacco between words. Cole's face was set, unreadable as river stone. Maggie kept her eyes down, half hoping she'd vanish if she stayed quiet enough, but Cole had a habit of noticing what others ignored. He saw Maggie stooped by the well, mud streaked to her knees, eyes rimmed with tiredness, older than her years. He watched as she cradled the sick baby with one arm, balancing the bucket with the other. Something shifted behind his gaze, a flicker of memory maybe, or just plain human ache. When he finished his business, Cole paused by the supply cart. He took out a parcel wrapped in oilcloth, handed it to Maggie without a word. She blinked, not understanding. He nodded at the bundle. Cornbread, some apples, nothing fancy. His voice was low, meant for her alone. Maggie stared, too startled to answer. No one had given her a thing in so long she almost forgot how to take it. Kane barked from the barn. "Back to work, girl." Maggie flinched, clutching the food to her chest. She glanced up at Cole, shame burning her cheeks, but he didn't look away. He met her eyes, steady and tired, and gave a single, almost invisible nod, like he saw her, really saw her, and knew she deserved better than this. She carried the bundle back to the bunkhouse, fingers trembling. Ellie Mae stirred as she opened it. Warm cornbread, sweet apple slices, more than she'd eaten in a week. Maggie broke off a piece, let Ellie Mae suck the crumbs from her finger, tears stinging at the kindness tucked inside that simple meal. It tasted of something she'd thought lost, mercy. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. She listened to the wind, the whistle of the rails, the heavy breathing of women dreaming of anywhere else. Her heart felt swollen with something unnamed. She held Ellie Mae close and promised again, "We'll get out. We'll find a place where nobody spits on us. I swear it." In the dark, she remembered Cole's eyes, gray as the river in winter, holding a sorrow that understood her own. It wasn't love, wasn't even hope yet, but it was a beginning. The next morning, the world felt changed, if only a little. Ellie Mae's fever broke before dawn. Maggie woke to the baby's thin cry and sunlight spilling through the cracks, and she let herself believe for the first time that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of Dustwater. Maybe someone out there saw her as more than a burden. Maybe there was a life not yet stolen. She tucked the last of the cornbread into her pocket, kissed Ellie Mae's damp curls, and stepped out into the day, ready for whatever would come. There was no gentle hand to guide the morning in Dustwater. Maggie woke to Jed Kramer's boots stomping by the bunkhouse door and Kane's voice bellowing about chores left undone. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and damp hay. Maggie bundled Ellie Mae tight, pressed a soft kiss to the baby's temple, then hurried out into the yard. Eyes down, heart rattling in her chest. Kane was waiting by the pump, arms folded, scowl deep. "You think you're clever, huh?" he sneered, waving a ledger in her face. "Think I don't see you dragging your feet? This ain't a charity. I paid for you, and I'll get every penny's worth." His spit landed near her bare foot, warm and mean. Maggie just nodded, lips pressed thin, clutching Ellie Mae close. He barked orders sharper than usual that day. "Double the water, no rest till supper. Jed, you watch her. She's got the look of a runner." Jed grinned, yellow teeth glinting, and shadowed Maggie every step. He bumped her shoulder in the wash-house, snatched Ellie Mae's blanket, made her beg to get it back. When she stumbled with a full bucket, he called her useless, loud enough for all the girls to hear. Lunch was stale bread. Kane took Maggie's slice for himself, said she could eat if the baby stopped crying. Ellie Mae, weak from hunger, whimpered against Maggie's chest. Maggie's anger coiled like wire, but she did what she always did, survived. Hands blistered, voice silent, back bent over the work that never seemed to end. By dusk, her arms shook from hauling sacks, legs heavy as wet clay. She slipped into the shadows behind the bunkhouse, just for a breath, and found herself staring at the sky. She wondered if her mama ever looked up like this, lost, bone-tired, wishing for a sign. Ellie Mae's eyelids fluttered, her little fist gripping Maggie's finger. Maggie swallowed her sorrow, rocked her sister gently, and whispered, "You hold on, Ellie. I'll find us a way, I promise." But Kane wasn't done. He caught her outside after dark, cornered her by the fence. "Don't think I don't see you, girl," he hissed, breath hot with whiskey. "Try to run, and the baby's out in the cold. You hear me?" Jed laughed from the shadows, kicked dirt at her feet. Maggie nodded, didn't trust her mouth to speak. She let the shame and anger settle like dust on her skin. That night the other girls kept to themselves, eyes full of pity, not one daring to offer comfort. Maggie lay on her cot. Ellie Mae curled tight against her. The ache inside was bigger than fear now, bigger than Dustwater itself. It was hunger, for kindness, for escape, for anything except this. She squeezed her eyes shut, willed herself not to cry. "Tomorrow," she mouthed. "Tomorrow I try again." In the hush between midnight and dawn, Maggie's resolve kindled, flickering but unbroken. Somewhere out there was mercy. She had seen it just once in the steady hand of a stranger, and she clung to that memory like a talisman against the dark. Rain in Dustwater was rare and mean, coming down sideways with a howl that rattled the roofs and sent every soul running for cover. The storm rolled in near midnight, tearing canvas from the bunkhouse, knocking loose boards into muddy streams. Maggie barely slept, her body curled around Ellie Mae as water dripped through the rafters, soaking the thin mattress beneath them. At dawn, the camp was chaos. The fence along the stockyard had half collapsed, and the main well was clogged with silt. Kane was red-faced with fury, barking at everyone to clean, mend, haul faster, always faster. Maggie slipped in the mud, her skirt sodden, arms shaking as she tried to right a bucket. Jed caught her by the elbow, jerked her hard. "Clumsy brat," he spat, his grip digging bruises. "That baby's just dead weight. Kane should have sold you both to the rail gang." Maggie twisted free, heart thudding, but kept her head low. No good came from fighting Jed, not when Kane was watching, not when she still had Ellie Mae to protect. She hurried to the well, balancing a pail on her hip, when the front gate creaked open. Cole Bennett rode in, hat pulled low against the rain, his coat streaming water. He led his horse slow, took in the mess with a long, silent glance. Kane swaggered out, eager to show off, but Cole's gaze didn't linger on the owner. It drifted to the girls, to the ruined fences, to Maggie clutching her pail and the sickly baby wrapped in oilcloth. If he saw Jed's handprint on Maggie's arm, he gave no sign. Cole handed over a small sack of coins, trading for 2 head of cattle and 3 broken plows. Kane haggled, puffed his chest, but Cole's voice stayed level, never rising, never breaking. After the deal, Cole turned to leave, then paused. The mule Maggie was using slipped in the mud, spilling water everywhere. Jed's fist shot out, aiming to strike, but before it landed, Cole's hand closed around Jed's wrist, stopping him cold. The yard went silent. Cole didn't say a word, just looked at Jed, gaze flat and hard as riverbed stone. Jed jerked back, muttering, and backed away, rubbing his arm. Kane barked at Maggie to clean up, but his words sounded thin in the storm. Cole knelt to help her gather the spilled buckets. For a moment, Maggie couldn't speak. She was soaked to the bone, mud on her cheeks, arms trembling with exhaustion and something that felt like hope. Cole met her eyes, his own gentler than she remembered. "You all right?" he asked, voice barely a rumble. She nodded, not trusting herself to answer. He helped her stand, silent as always, then pressed something small into her hand, a folded scrap of oiled cloth, warm from his pocket. "Dry socks," he said. "It matters." He glanced at Ellie Mae, who whimpered softly in her sling. "Keep her close tonight. Storms pass, but cold lingers." Then, with a last look at Kane and Jed, Cole mounted his horse and rode off, vanishing into the rain like he'd never been there at all. The yard came back to life, girls whispering, Kane cursing, Jed scowling, but Maggie felt a tiny ember inside, glowing beneath the bruises. That night, Maggie wrung out the socks and tucked Ellie Mae's feet into them, watched the baby relax at last. For the first time in weeks, Maggie let herself believe that not everyone in Dustwater was made of dust and bitterness. There was someone out there, just one man maybe, but enough, who saw her, who'd stopped a blow that would have left her weaker. As the storm moved east and the world quieted, Maggie lay awake, whispering to Ellie Mae in the dark, her voice a shield against the howling wind. "We're not invisible, we're not broken, not if someone still cares." Word spread fast in Dustwater, faster than the rain dried, faster than the bruises faded. Maggie heard it first from Lila, the girl with a burn scar on her jaw, as they scrubbed blood from the butcher's table. "Kane's got a letter," Lila whispered, voice barely above breath. "Says he's fixing to sell you off. Someplace up past the border. Worse than here, I heard." Maggie's hands shook so badly she dropped the rag in the basin. She tried to ask who'd sent the letter, but Lila just shook her head, eyes wide, and hurried off. That night, Kane called Maggie to the porch. The light from the lantern painted his features sharp and mean. He leaned back, boots crossed, Jed at his side like a loyal mutt. "You're worth more than you think, girl," Kane drawled, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Some folks up in Red Bluff got use for a strong back and a silent tongue. They'll pay good for you and that squalling brat. I might even throw in a bonus for her being so little." Maggie didn't dare speak. She held Ellie Mae tighter, the baby restless with fever. "You'll leave by week's end," Kane said, his smile thin as razor wire. "Maybe you'll learn to keep your mouth shut up there." When Kane dismissed her, Maggie stumbled back to the bunkhouse, heart thudding with dread. She pressed her face into the rags beside Ellie Mae and bit back tears. There was no escape, no road out. The sky outside was bruised purple, the prairie stretching farther than she could dream of running, but Dustwater was never truly silent. By morning, the yard was restless, cowhands cursing as they fixed fences, girls whispering of buyers and fate. Maggie saw Cole's horse in town, tied up near the saloon. For a wild, reckless moment, she nearly ran after him. Instead, she watched from the alley, trying to imagine another life. Inside, smoke curled from the saloon's chimney. Cole sat at the bar, hat tipped low, listening as the barkeep spoke in hushed tones. Virgil Kane swaggered in, coat sharp, pockets heavy with the promise of a new deal. Cole ordered coffee, never touching the whiskey, and waited. Kane spread his hands wide, laid out his offer like a deck of marked cards. "You want her?" Kane asked, voice greasy with triumph. "You want that little stray and her pup, it'll cost you. Girl's got good hands, doesn't complain. I'd keep her myself, but times are lean." His laugh was rough, echoing off the walls. Cole listened without blinking. He said nothing when Kane called Maggie damaged goods, nothing when Jed chimed in with filth. Cole reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and set it on the counter. The sound of silver coins rang like a bell in the hush. Kane's eyes lit up, but he tried to hide it. "Double that, and she's yours, both of 'em," he said, daring Cole to walk away. Cole just looked at him. His voice was soft, but the whole room heard, "The money's for a fair deal, not for a buy." Soul Kane sneered. "Ain't nothing fair in Dustwater, Bennett. You know that." Cole stood, gathering his coins with one hand, the other resting on his belt. "Then make it quick," he said. "You take what's owed, and after tonight, you leave her be." The deal was struck. Cole didn't shake Kane's hand. He didn't meet Jed's glare. He just walked out, slow and silent, into the street. Back at the camp, Maggie didn't know her fate had changed. She rocked Ellie Mae through the afternoon, staring at the cracked ceiling, dreaming of grass and rivers and sky. When Cole appeared at the edge of the yard, she nearly didn't recognize him. His shoulders set with purpose. He nodded once. "Get your things." She blinked, sure it was a trick. "Now." Her voice was barely there. "Now," Cole said. "You and the baby." Kane watched from the porch, counting his silver, already thinking of the next deal. Jed glowered but didn't move. Maggie gathered her rags, her hope, and followed Cole through the dust and dusk. For the first time since her mother died, she felt the air open in her lungs, tasted the wild on her tongue. She didn't look back, not even once. The night wind of Dustwater carried voices and secrets as Cole led Maggie and Ellie Mae out past the lanterns, past Kane's wooden porch and Jed's long shadow. The road was empty, the sky a torn quilt of stars. Maggie's legs trembled, Ellie Mae heavy in her arms, and the taste of fear mixed with something sharp, a hope so thin it could snap. Cole moved with that quiet certainty of men who have nothing left to lose. He didn't reach for her, didn't rush her. He just led the old roan gelding by the reins, and every step was a promise. At the edge of the cottonwoods, Cole paused. "You ride up front," he said, voice low, and helped Maggie climb behind the saddle horn. She'd never ridden astride before, and her skirt tangled. But he didn't laugh, just made sure Ellie Mae was swaddled safe in the crook of her arm. They rode in silence, hooves muffled by the red dust, past dry creek beds and twisted barbed wire, past shacks and ghosted wagon wheels. Maggie's eyes stung, half from wind, half from the memory of every bruise, every sharp word. Every night she'd believed she was less than nothing. She'd never dreamed she'd leave that camp, never dreamed a man might keep his word for her sake. Behind them, Kane's laughter faded to a memory. At a fork in the trail, Cole stopped, scanning the night with the same care he might use in a cattle drive gone wrong. He reached into his coat, pulling out a battered flask, but offered it to Maggie first. She shook her head, whispering, "For the baby," though her lips cracked from thirst. Cole nodded, capped the flask, and pointed toward a lantern's glow ahead. "There's an old barn up yonder. We'll hole up till dawn." His voice was all gravel and comfort. Inside the barn, Maggie wrapped Ellie Mae in a clean blanket Cole had brought. The hay smelled of sun and old storms, a gentler scent than sweat and bleach and fear. Maggie leaned back against the stall door, cradling her sister close, and for the first time, sleep drifted over her like a mercy. Cole kept watch. He cleaned his rifle, hands steady in the lamplight, boots planted square in the dirt. Once or twice Maggie woke and saw him outlined against the barn window, still as the grave, watching for trouble. Dawn crept in cool and gold. Cole saddled up without a word, helping Maggie mount again. She winced at the soreness in her thighs, but Cole's hand steadied her at the small of her back just enough. He rode ahead, the air warming as they passed fields of blue sage and wiregrass, leaving Dustwater behind. By mid-morning, the road bent along a shallow stream. Birds flitted in the willows, and for a moment, it all seemed too bright, too safe. Maggie half expected Kane's voice or Jed's boots thudding up behind them. But nothing came except the sound of water and Ellie Mae's slow, even breathing. Cole finally spoke. "We're almost home." Home. The word didn't fit in Maggie's mouth. She'd never had one that lasted, never had walls or a roof that weren't someone else's charity or threat. She studied Cole's back, broad and steady, and wondered what kind of man took in strangers just because it was right. When they crested the last rise, Maggie saw it. Bennett Ranch, sprawled beside the slow-moving San Pedro Creek. Fences patched but standing, a barn with one door hanging open, a house painted white, though the paint had peeled. The cottonwoods stood thick and proud, leaves flickering in the light. Chickens scattered as they rode in. A hound lifted his head and yawned. Cole swung down, lifted Ellie Mae from her arms so gently it made Maggie's chest ache. "You'll want to rest," he said, nodding toward the porch. "Annie Lou'll see to you." The door opened before Maggie could answer. A sturdy woman in a blue dress bustled out, all kindness and brisk efficiency. "Get in here, girl," Annie Lou called, arms already reaching for the baby. "We'll set you right." Inside, Maggie nearly collapsed on the kitchen chair. Annie Lou set a tin cup of warm milk in front of her, bathed Ellie Mae, and laid out a faded cotton dress on the bed. "You're safe here," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Maggie's ear. For the first time in her memory, Maggie Ray believed it. She drank the milk, cradled Ellie Mae against her chest, and listened to the wind outside, not searching for danger, but for peace. Cole stayed outside, mending a broken hinge on the barn door, moving through the morning like a man returned to himself. He didn't come in for breakfast. He didn't ask for thanks. That night, as the stars burned white and sharp, Maggie stood on the porch, Ellie Mae sleeping sound in her arms. Cole passed by, boots scuffing the step. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. The world was silent and whole. He nodded, tipping his hat. "You made it," he said. She nodded back, voice barely above a whisper. "Thanks to you." The wind smelled like freedom. For once, Maggie let herself breathe it in. The moon was a faint lantern swinging high over Bennett Ranch as Cole readied the horses in the hush before midnight. Maggie's hands shook as she dressed Ellie Mae in the borrowed cotton dress, her own hair still damp from Annie Lou's gentle washing. She moved quietly through the dark house, half afraid to wake and find it all a dream that might vanish with the dawn. Annie Lou pressed a small packet of food into Maggie's hands, her voice low but warm. "If you get hungry on the road, this'll help. Cole's stubborn, but he knows what's right." There was a pause, soft as a sigh. "You belong here as much as anyone ever did, honey." Maggie could only nod, her words snagged somewhere between her chest and throat. Ellie Mae whimpered, rooting for milk, and Maggie shifted her, heart thudding wild with a feeling she couldn't name. Part fear, part wonder, part a longing that felt older than her bones. Outside, Cole waited with his old gelding and a sturdy roan mare saddled and ready. He didn't hurry her. "It's best we leave before first light," he said, voice a soft scrape in the stillness. "Kane's boys drink hard, but they ride mean when they're sober." Annie Lou hugged Maggie once, fierce and fast. "I'll keep the coffee hot. Don't let him ride you to pieces." Cole almost smiled at that, then swung into his saddle. He helped Maggie mount behind him, her arms tightening around his waist. Ellie Mae nestled between them, shielded from the wind. They moved out slow, hooves thumping over dirt and roots, past the riverbank where frogs sang in the weeds. The night was thick with uncertainty, but Cole rode steady. He didn't talk, didn't need to. The weight of his presence was a kind of answer. She wasn't alone. Somewhere behind, the ranch lights blinked out, and Dustwater faded to memory. The trail wound through groves of piñon pine, moonlight catching in the needles. Maggie's mind drifted to every day she'd spent shackled to Cain's will, to Jed's jeers, to the hungry ache she'd carried for years. Her shame felt like a second skin. But Ellie Mae slept sound, her breath sweet and even, and Maggie realized, for the first time in her life, she didn't have to carry that shame alone. They crossed a shallow creek, boots splashing. Cole dismounted and led the horses over the slick rocks, steady as stone. Maggie gripped the reins, letting the night and the water wash some of her fear away. Dawn found them at the edge of a wide, open pasture. The grass glimmered silver and the sun bled slow behind a stand of cottonwoods. Maggie blinked into the new light, skin sticky with cold, heart thumping. Cole handed her a piece of cornbread from Annie Lou's packet. "Eat, you'll need it." His voice was gruff, but she caught the care beneath. They paused, letting the horses drink from the stream. Cole checked the sky, then the empty horizon. "Cain'll notice soon," he said. "He'll send Jed, or worse. You got anything left in you for riding?" Maggie nodded, though her thighs burned and her arms ached. "I can keep going." Ellie Mae gurgled, mouth searching for food, and Maggie fed her, awkward but determined. They rode through the morning. Once a wagon passed, a pair of old farmers with sharp eyes. Cole nodded but didn't stop. "No need to stir up talk," he murmured. The road curled up a rise. From the top, Maggie saw the world spread wide, red rock mesas, thin smoke from far-off cabins, cattle grazing in the distance. Cole pointed. "That's where we'll stop tonight, safe enough. Folks there owe me a favor." As the sun dropped behind the hills, they arrived at a cluster of cabins set back from the road. Cole's old friend, Walt Pickett, stood waiting, his beard thick as wire and his voice rolling like thunder. "Cole Bennett, I'll be damned, and you brought guests." Cole gave Maggie a look, gentle, reassuring. "You're safe here. Walt's good people." Walt's wife, Mary, brought stew and warm water for washing. Maggie fed Ellie Mae, then sat by the fire, letting the crackle and pop lull her. She listened to Walt and Cole talk in low voices about cattle and fences and the kind of trouble that might ride after them. She caught her name once or twice, but didn't ask. That night, Maggie curled around Ellie Mae on a straw tick mattress, the fire's glow soft on the wall. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind. She could hear Cole's footsteps on the porch, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time since her world had cracked apart, Maggie dared to close her eyes and hope that morning would come without pain. And when sleep finally found her, it was deep and healing, a promise she never thought she'd earn. Sunlight trickled through the warped window panes, painting stripes across the rough floorboards. As Maggie woke to the sounds of a home at work, Walt's rooster crowed somewhere out by the barn. Mary hummed over a kettle, the soft notes drifting through the cabin. For a breath, Maggie let herself pretend she was just a girl again. No debts, no fear, just another soul in the wide West waking to a morning she could call her own. But Ellie Mae stirred, rooting for warmth. Maggie pulled her close, breathing in the scent of milk and wood smoke, feeling the ache in her arms and legs, the pinch of old bruises. She looked down at the baby and saw not just her burden, but her reason. Today everything would change. Mary smiled as she brought warm water and a faded cotton dress. "You get yourself clean, honey. No sense starting a new life wearing the dust of the last one." Maggie bathed Ellie Mae first, wiping away every smudge, then scrubbed herself raw. She dressed in the borrowed clothes, the fabric rough but clean against her skin. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like just another piece of property. At breakfast, Walt's booming laugh filled the air, and Cole's voice was low, measured, a safe anchor in the morning. "We'll ride after we eat," he said, nodding toward Maggie, then at Ellie Mae in her lap. "San Pedro Creek's just half a day's ride. My place sits near the bend." Mary pressed a crust of bread into Maggie's hand. "You remember, there's good folks yet. Sometimes it just takes time to find 'em." They left after breakfast, Maggie's heart a mix of nerves and hope. Cole rode ahead, his silhouette broad and steady. Maggie cradled Ellie Mae, bouncing with the rhythm of the mare's stride. Each mile from Dustwater felt like another layer peeling off her shoulders. The landscape changed. Brush gave way to tall grass, wild flowers dusted the edges of the trail, and a pair of hawks wheeled in the blue sky overhead. Cole pointed out landmarks as they rode. "That ridge, you see it? Cattle sometimes wander up there, but there's good water." He wasn't one for wasted words, but his sharing was its own kind of welcome. By noon they reached Bennett Ranch. A patchwork of fence and pasture stretched along San Pedro Creek. The house stood squat and solid, its roof patched but straight, a porch slouched under the weight of climbing vines. In the yard, chickens pecked and a pair of dogs lay curled in the shade, tails thumping lazily as the horses drew close. Maggie's nerves prickled, but Cole just swung down and handed her the reins. "Let's get you inside." He opened the door, not with flourish, but like he'd done it 1,000 times. "You'll sleep here," he said, showing her a small room off the main hall, sunlit and clean. "There's a crib for the baby and fresh water in the basin." It was more than she'd dared hope for, more than she'd let herself imagine. Maggie placed Ellie Mae in the crib, her hands shaking. The baby blinked up at her, face soft and untroubled. Maggie knelt and wept, quiet and grateful, letting every bruise and heartbreak flow out and away. That evening, Annie Lou came down the lane, arms loaded with a faded dress and a bundle of sweet-smelling herbs. "You made it," she grinned. "Knew you would." She helped Maggie wash Ellie Mae again, this time singing a song Maggie's mother used to hum. The tune wrapped around her like a memory, gentle as the breeze off the creek. For supper they all ate together. Cole, Annie Lou, Walt, and Mary, even the dogs circling their feet. No one asked for a story, no one probed about scars, they just shared bread, laughter, and the comfort of company. For the first time, Maggie tasted what it meant to be welcome, not useful. When night fell, she stood on the porch, Ellie Mae warm against her chest, and looked out over the land. The stars spilled in the sky, the creek sang below, and Cole leaned against the rail, quiet and strong. "You did good today," he said. She didn't answer, just let the words settle in, soft and deep. Inside, she tucked Ellie Mae into the crib, smoothed her hair, and for a long while watched the baby sleep, her small chest rising and falling. Maggie realized, maybe for the first time, that she didn't have to keep running. She could build something here. She could rest. The night was cool, the house sturdy, and Maggie Ray, at last, felt herself begin to belong. The air was thick with the smell of sage and coming rain. The sun had not yet risen when Cole roused Maggie with a gentle knock on the door. "Storm's rolling in," he said. "We need to see to the stock before it hits." Maggie nodded, already awake from a restless night. Ellie Mae whimpered, but settled against Maggie's chest, wrapped snug in the old blanket Annie Lou had gifted her. As Maggie stepped onto the porch, the sky to the west pulsed with flickers of lightning, a dark wall pressing closer across the open prairie. Cole moved quickly and steady, his boots leaving tracks in the dew. Walt joined him at the barn, jaw set, lantern swinging in one hand. "Never seen clouds come up so fast," Walt muttered, squinting into the dark. "We'll need every hand if that herd spooks." Maggie took Ellie Mae to the kitchen, setting her in the cradle by the stove, where Annie Lou promised to keep watch. Then, without waiting for invitation, Maggie grabbed a slicker and headed out, heart pounding. Her place was not inside tonight. The wind whipped the grass flat, stinging Maggie's face as she crossed the yard. Cole looked up, ready to argue, but saw her set jaw and said nothing. Together they moved to the corral, where the youngest calves cried, already frightened by the shifting air. Rain lashed the barn roof, a steady drum. Walt called out, his voice nearly lost. "Bail those gates, Cole. Maggie, see to the feed. Quick now!" Maggie's hands shook, but she forced herself to move, shoveling grain, her body running on memory and need. The cattle bellowed as the first wave of thunder broke overhead. A loud crack splintered the night. A branch snapped and fell, spooking the herd. Calves bolted. Maggie slipped, knees skidding through the mud, but caught herself before she fell. Cole and Walt sprinted after the animals, ropes in hand, cursing under their breath. The wind howled, tearing at the fences, pushing rain into every crack. In the chaos, Maggie caught sight of a newborn calf pinned beneath a collapsed rail, eyes wide with terror. She didn't think, just moved, shoving aside broken boards, arms burning with effort. Her dress ripped, knees scraped, but she got her hands around the little one and pulled with all she had. For a moment, it felt hopeless. The calf was heavy, the rain relentless. But then Cole appeared at her side, jaw grim, helping her lift. Together they freed the calf, dragging it back to shelter. Cole looked at her, mud streaked and shaking, and something in his face shifted, a respect that ran deeper than words. Dawn came slow, painting the battered ranch in pale gold. The storm had ripped shingles from the roof, scattered branches across the yard, but most of the herd survived. Maggie helped Walt and Annie Lou tend to the wounded stock. Her hands were raw, dress ruined, hair wild and damp. But when she looked at Ellie Mae, safe, sleeping, she felt something close to pride. Cole found her by the barn, a mug of coffee in his hand. "You didn't have to do all that," he said, voice quiet. She shrugged, shivering. "Somebody had to." He handed her the cup. "You're tougher than most men I've met out here." Maggie let a small, tired smile break across her lips. "That's not saying much some days." They stood together in the aftermath, the wreckage of the night scattered around them, but also the quiet victory of survival. For the first time, Cole's hand rested gently on her shoulder, not just as a gesture of thanks, but as an acknowledgement of her strength, of her place here. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the worst of the storm faded, Annie Lou brought out a battered mirror. "You should see yourself, honey," she teased. "You look like you fought the devil himself and won." Maggie looked at her reflection, mud on her cheek, eyes tired but bright, shoulders squared. She almost didn't recognize herself. Something new had settled in her chest, something steadier than hope, a kind of belonging. That night, after the chores and the cleaning and the checking on every last animal, Maggie stood on the porch. Cole joined her, silent, watching the stars peek through clearing clouds. She didn't need words to know he saw her now, not just as a mouth to feed, or a burden, or a lost girl, but as an equal, forged by hardship, standing her ground on new soil. The storm had passed, but Maggie Ray felt stronger for it, and when she finally slept, Ellie Mae tucked against her side, she dreamed not of running or hiding, but of planting roots, of a life finally her own. The morning broke clean and bright, the last of the storm's anger rinsed from the land. Maggie Ray stood in the hush of dawn on the porch of the Bennett Ranch. Ellie Mae nestled in her arms, her tiny mouth soft against Maggie's collarbone. For a long while she watched the field steam under new sunlight, dew shining on every blade of grass, the world both battered and made new. Cole stepped outside, his boots careful on the planks. He held something behind his back. "Couldn't sleep neither, huh?" he said. Maggie shook her head, the weight of yesterday still lingering in her muscles, but there was peace under the ache. For a few moments the only sound was the wind moving through the cottonwoods and the cattle lowing in the distant pasture. Cole cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, Maggie," he said, voice shy as a boy's. "You've come through more than most folks ever will. Ain't nobody here can say you haven't earned your place." He brought his hands forward, holding out a pair of boots, new but not fancy, the kind made to last. "Ain't much, but they're yours," he said. "Figured it's time you had something that fits." Maggie looked down at her bare feet, still caked with the mud of last night's fight. The boots were brown, sturdy, stitched with care. Her throat tightened, not from sorrow, but from something softer, a gratitude she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't know what to call it. She slipped them on, the leather warm, snug. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the ground bite at her soles. Ellie Mae yawned and stretched in Maggie's arms, tiny fists balled. Annie Lou, apron tied firm, waved from the yard. Walt tipped his hat from the barn door. There was no celebration, no big fuss, just these small moments strung together, a different kind of survival. Cole watched her lace the boots, his gaze gentle. "You're not a servant here, Maggie. Not a mouth to feed or a burden. You're family, if you want it." Maggie met his eyes, a slow warmth blooming in her chest. "I reckon I do," she said. Her voice didn't shake. The shame that had trailed her so long, of being sold, used, named by men who'd never loved her, fell away like old skin. That afternoon, Maggie helped Annie Lou bake bread, her hands sure and quick, Ellie Mae crawling across the kitchen floor. Walt showed her how to mend a saddle, gruff but patient. Cole handed her a set of keys, barn, smokehouse, gate. "You belong here as much as any of us," he told her. Evening settled soft and gold, the air thick with the smell of bread and sun-warmed grass. Maggie sat on the porch steps, boots dusty but sturdy, Ellie Mae asleep on her lap. Cole joined her, lowering himself onto the step, shoulders close but not crowding. They watched the sky fade from blue to lavender, listened to the frogs begin their night song down by the creek. Cole cleared his throat. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes a man spends half his life trying to prove he's not like his father. Then one day he looks around and realizes he's got a chance to be better, if he's got the right folks by his side." Maggie didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached over and laid her hand over his, her grip steady. "Thank you," she said, and in those two words was every unspoken hope she'd carried since the day her world cracked open. As the moon rose over Dustwater, Maggie Ray sat with her boots planted firm on new ground, her chin lifted, her heart unafraid. She was not a girl sold or used, not a burden, not a ghost. She was a sister, a worker, a survivor, a woman learning to stand her ground. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Maggie didn't feel the need to look down.